New letters coming out from the victims of sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, who are concerned in a different way than so many people who view this case as a political controversy or online content or many of the other ways that it has mushroomed. These are the people who lived through it, the victims and their families. And they say the Trump Justice Department is putting convicted pedophiles and sex traffickers above the victims. We're going to start right here, and I'm just going to read to you what they're saying. Quote, I feel like the DOJ and FBI priority is protecting the third party, the wealthy men, focusing on scrubbing their names off the files. That's a reference to the reporting about the benefits Donald Trump himself and others may have gotten, of which the victims know who they are. They continue, quote, to learn that our own president has utilized thousands of agents to protect his identity. And these high-profile individuals is monumentally mind-blowing. That's their focus. Wow. The reports are how Donald Trump famously put Epstein conspiracy theorists and other sort of podcasters in charge of the FBI. And remember, the reporting is they spent a lot of time and energy going through the material. And while some of them may have said or claimed they wanted to do that to then release it, remember, nothing's been released. That's why he's accused of a cover-up. But we do have reporting that they also used that time to shield various names. So remember, if you're keeping track of what has been a sordid political story, a lot of the people who claim to care about this story for justice, to go after bad guys like Epstein and his conspirator Maxwell, are now aligned with a government that's doing the opposite, shielding people, giving more secrecy to Maxwell and of course, the deceased Epstein, because while he's gone, the information could still come out and matter to people. And on top of all that, the administration going into the weekend gave leniency to the only incarcerated conspirator. Now the issue's snowballing, and I want to show you a way that it has affected Donald Trump, who is, if nothing else, very conscious and sometimes skilled at PR. He understands the difference between noise and language, wherever it may be in our world, and things that go to the heart of his political base, which he has always kept an eye on. So imagine his concern when someone who's been outspoken in many venues, Charlamagne tha God, he's a popular radio host, he interviewed Harris, he's taken on more of a political role over the years, although he's known first and foremost as a New York music radio host, but he also has the show on Comedy Central, he's been on MSNBC. He is someone who goes and talks to all kinds of people. And that may be because a lot of people have seen his voice as important. Clearly Fox News and Donald Trump do, which is the story I'm telling you tonight, because he went on Fox talking to none other than Laura Trump. And so he is speaking with his reach, his credibility, but to the MAGA audience, making headlines, calling out what he sees as a Republican coup in the making over the Epstein issue, which led to a Trump backlash.
I think there's a political coup going on right now in the Republican Party that people aren't paying attention to.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I think that this Epstein thing is going to be a way for traditional conservatives to take their party back. This is the issue that has gotten the base riled up. The MAGA base isn't letting this issue go, and for the first time, they know they can, probably take their party back and not piss off the MAGA base. I think they're going to do that.
That's Charlamagne's take. As for who's getting pissed off, well, the president certainly was. He wrote a lengthy diatribe with plenty of personal attacks, going after Charlamagne, calling him names, saying he doesn't know anything about Trump. But the problem goes deeper than just a messenger, so to speak, referring to real evidence out there in a venue that clearly bothered Trump, the Trump hour of Fox there. The wider swath of voters are also concerned. There's new polling out today. 70% of Americans think that there is a client list, and while there may not be, the DOJ claims there isn't. That comes after a long time where Bondi and others literally told everyone there was. More than 60% see Trump as hiding information. That's true. That's the secrecy we've been reporting on. And a whopping 81% blame Trump for the way that the administration or others are hiding the info. In other words, the dance that we hear politicians sometimes do apparently isn't working on most of the public. 81% includes a heck of a lot of Trump voters. Top Republicans are also concerned about that story going into the weekend, where this administration, which rode a wave of outrage over Epstein, is now giving leniency to his only incarcerated conspirator, Maxwell. So she was moved to that minimum security prison. Epstein victims were outraged. Why, of anyone in the entire prison system, in their view, should this convicted sex trafficker who worked with Epstein get leniency right now, get a nicer prison environment, which, by the way, if you're a prisoner, that's one of the biggest major changes in your life you can get other than getting sprung out, is getting to a better, sometimes safer prison. She got to a minimum security facility that, under DOJ rules, people convicted of her crimes shouldn't even be allowed to be in, which makes it very suspicious. Now, Republican senators, who famously go along with just about everything Trump does, including things that they had previously opposed, say this whole Maxwell thing has gone far enough. They are publicly urging Trump not to pardon her. To even have that conversation is a type of indictment. Think about the ethics of pardoning a convicted sex trafficker if there's no new evidence or substantive reason. Trump is not ruling it out, which is why they are warning in public. And so the Epstein panic, from the substance, what I read to you from the victims and their families, to the politics, Charlemagne, and the polling, to the ethics, again, of a world where the people who claim justice for Epstein are now aligned with a president who's helping an Epstein conspirator and sex trafficker. We turn to Michelle Goldberg, who has been reporting and writing about this for some time for the New York Times, an MSNBC analyst. Your view about this story and how it continues with the substantive help to Maxwell. She's been upgraded.
It's so astonishing. And I mean, I feel like so many astonishing things happen in this rolling catastrophe of an administration that we lose track of it. But how quickly we have moved from Trump is going to blow the lid off on the Epstein conspiracy to Trump is going to both, sort of do favors for Epstein's chief conspirator. And now the idea of a pardon is out there in the ether. It's really astonishing. And I think the question then becomes, first of all, why this transfer, which nobody has even given the ghost of an explanation for. And then what is Trump hiding, right? Because all of this is happening when Ghislaine Maxwell, there still is a possibility that she could be subpoenaed to testify before Congress. So first you have Trump sending his former private attorney, now a Justice Department official, to speak to her for hours on end. Then she gets this inexplicable transfer. And again, I'm somebody who didn't necessarily think that there was something terribly incriminating about Donald Trump in these files, but he is doing his best. I mean, on the one hand, he says he wants this story to go away. He wants people to stop talking about it, but he obviously doesn't want that enough not to make, or for his administration not to make these moves that, at least on the surface, look extraordinarily incriminating.
Yeah, these are huge risks. These are very guilty-looking risks, to your point. And in politics, looking guilty is bad. In law, we have a different standard. And as you were careful to note, the fact that somebody's referenced or caught up in a scene is not at all probative of the higher criminal standard. And he hasn't, even when he was out of power, been accused of that kind of wrongdoing. And he's famously been accused and faced prosecution for other wrongdoing. As for the so-called transparency, that's the other whole bit of it, Michelle. They have twisted themselves in knots. The victims, as I reported, are upset about it. But the government officials have twisted themselves in knots in a way that they can't hide. There were enough FBI personnel involved that people discussed it with reporters, and reporters very carefully sourced and fact-checked. Bongino famously talked about, well, if they don't release it, he might quit. Well, he hasn't quit, and they haven't released it. And it goes on in that manner, where then one of the floated things, as you know, and I'll remind viewers, because there's been so many twists and turns, was, maybe they need a special counsel. You don't need a special counsel. You have all the stuff. You don't need a new way to punt it out for a year if anyone was serious about transparency. Here's what Obama's AG said about that debate right now.
So finally, you would release the files if you were Attorney General right now?
Yeah, I mean, take into account, the privacy interests of various people, certainly the victims uppermost. But there is investigative material that can certainly be released, that should be released. The focus shouldn't be on grand jury material, because there are a whole bunch of problems with respect to the release of grand jury materials. But with regard to investigative files that are in the possession of the Justice Department and the FBI, those materials should be released.
So what does the secrecy tell us?
Well, I mean, it's certainly not about the victims, right? And that has been their fig leaf so far. You've heard that from Kash Patel and from others, that they can't release this material because it would re-victimize these women. Now, these women are out there saying, or at least some of them, that they feel victimized by the way the administration is handling this material, and yet it's not changing the administration's approach. So I think we can rule out any concern about that from their motives. And again, we don't know what they're hiding. We only know that, you know, the indications are overwhelming that they're hiding something, and that they're willing to take significant political hits. I mean, right, the floating a pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell is crazy. It's, you know, and it's also guaranteed to keep this story alive now, long after this administration has tried to put it to bed. And yet they're willing to do it. Why?
You can narrow or widen the aperture as much as you want. You can look at the very big picture or the small local picture anywhere in the country. And we try to do as much of both of those things as we can every week here on this show. But whether you're looking at small-scale local stories or the biggest picture stories about what's happening in our country, the story is the same. And it is now an undeniable thing. We have crossed a line. We are in a place we did not want to be, but we are there. The thing we were all warning about for the last few years is not coming, it is here. We are in it. This is what it likes, it turns out. This is what it's like, right? I mean, it's August, it's a Monday, every day the sun rises and the sun sets, and there are, you know, sports and movies, and there are new hit songs, there are scandals here and there are crimes. There's everybody's personal quotient of family drama and health worries and money worries and falling in and out of love and in and out of faith. Life has not stopped, and none of our personal lives have stopped. But also, at the same time, life in the United States is profoundly changing, is profoundly different than it was even 6 months ago. Because we do now live in a country that has an authoritarian leader in charge. We have a consolidating dictatorship in our country. And it sounds melodramatic to say it, I know. But just go with that for a minute, right? Think in melodramatic terms. Think in cinematic terms. Imagine the cartoon-level caricature of what you think a dictatorship looks like. I mean, it's secret police, right? A massive, anonymous, unbadged, literally masked, totally unaccountable internal police force that apparently has infinite funding, but no identifiable leadership. And they act in ways designed to instill maximum fear and use maximum force. I mean, when you imagine an authoritarian country, right, what you imagine is masked secret police breaking people's car windows and snatching people off the streets and out of church parking lots and courtroom hallways and taking them away with no charges, no notice, no paperwork, no explanation, not letting them see lawyers, and then moving them secretly to what are effectively black site prisons, where they won't tell you who's there and where no one's allowed in to see what's going on. Right? And that kind of a cartoon caricature of an authoritarian country, the one you might have imagined in melodramatic and cinematic terms ever before we got here, you would expect, right, that you'd have a scapegoated minority group blamed for all things. In our case, immigrants, right? And the new extraordinary powers and shows of force by the secret police, among other things. All these extraordinary powers and shows of force will be framed as necessary to stop this terrible internal enemy, right? Frame everything as immigration enforcement. Because for immigration enforcement, not only is all force justified, but maximum force is preferred. And they're trying to make it into a national entertainment to threaten to feed immigrants to alligators in South Florida. Right? They're making them eat off dishes on the floor like they're dogs. The Crome Detention Center in Florida. They want us to like that, right? The Republican Party wants to sell T-shirts about that. And if you think it's only about immigrants, take the president's own word for it when he says the homegrowns are next. And then he starts musing publicly about which Americans he intends to strip of their citizenship. In a cartoon caricature of an authoritarian country, displays of military might are not just for the country's external enemies. They're for the country's own people, right? Because in an authoritarian country, you turn military force inward toward the people of that country. And so now we've got these large and expanding military zones in multiple states where they have extended the legal boundaries of nearby military bases to include hundreds and hundreds of miles of nearby land. So they can give active duty U.S. troops the power to arrest and search people on U.S. soil. They are now doing that over hundreds of miles of territory in multiple states. Both The Intercept and The New Republic in the last couple of days have had new reporting about Trump administration plans to permanently integrate the active duty U.S. military into, of course, immigration enforcement. So we will have our own U.S. military troops mobilized on U.S. soil, U.S. military force turn inward on us in an ongoing and permanent way for immigration enforcement, right? And like they tried in L.A., to put down protests against the government because those protests relate to immigration enforcement. What else do you think of when you think of authoritarian countries? I mean, in the worst case, you think of death camps. We don't have those. What we do have are black site prison camps, including huge new ones that are designed to hold thousands of people. The biggest ones we've yet had have just been bidded out to contractors for construction, and they're building them now on U.S. military bases. And they say they want states to build them all over the country. In the cartoon caricature of an authoritarian state, there's secret police, there's prison camps, there's the scapegoated enemy on whom all things must be blamed and against whom all things are justified. Protests must be criminalized. Media must be intimidated into saying and doing what the leader wants, or they must be shut down, or both. Universities must be intimidated into saying and doing what the leader wants, or they must be shut down, or both. Law firms must be intimidated into not opposing him and saying and doing what he wants, or they must be shut down. And for institutions like that, it's not just the boldest or most strident critics of the president who must be shut down. It's the most mainstream, right? It's the most prestigious, the most credible, because that's what's so dangerous about them. There can't be any source of authority. There can't be any source of authoritative statements of fact that compete with what the leader insists must be the new truth. And so government departments will be stripped of their experts, and he will fire his way through them until they tell him things that he wants to be told. If you want to be a 4-star general or admiral in this military, you must now pass a personal one-on-one interview with the president, who personally will decide if you are to his liking or not to be a flag officer in this military. The intelligence agencies will say that his strike on Iran obliterated their nuclear program because he likes that word, obliterated, and he said it once. And therefore, because he said it, it must be true. And if you say otherwise, you will be fired. The Justice Department will say that the president won not just the last election, but he also won the one before that, the one he actually lost. And anybody who points out that Russia tried to help him win the one before that should be criminally charged for saying that, even though it's true. We are not heading towards something like this. We are there. It is here. It is the environment in which we are now living. And so, given that you now live in a country with an authoritarian leader, the question is, what can you do for your country? The question is no longer how to prepare for this risk or how to try to avert it, but rather how to fight it now that it is here and in effect. And, you know, we're awake now. It's clear. We're all living here. It's very obvious that this is not going to get better on its own. This is not going to fix itself. An authoritarian just seeks more and more and more power throughout not just politics, but through all of society, systematically trying to eliminate any effective means of opposing him. This is a one-way ratchet if we leave it up to him. But that at least does give us some clarity for Americans who do not want to leave it up to him. Right? We're beyond waiting and seeing now. It is clear what is going on. It is clear now that the small d democratic tools that we've got right now as a country, these are as good as it is going to get. We are never going to have more resources to fight for our country than we do right now. And so Americans are using those tools, and it is worth paying attention to the ways they are doing it. They are filming the secret police and publicizing everything they are doing. Even when the secret police scream and threaten and say, you're not allowed to film us, they are filming them. They are following them everywhere they go. They are not letting them have the power of surprise. They are refusing to be afraid to watch them and record them and show what they are doing. We have opposition politicians, Democratic politicians, insisting on being let in, going to the black site immigration prisons and demanding to be let into them. We have Americans protesting outside those facilities and showing up and calling the media and pulling every string they can when someone they know or someone they know of gets taken. Americans are making it as sticky and annoying and awkward and embarrassing as possible for these guys, and that slows them down. Americans are badgering elected Republicans everywhere they're willing to show their faces, including tonight in Nebraska, Republican Congressman Mike Flood holding a town hall with his red state constituents. Watch.
Hi, I implore you to be quiet so that we can hear his responses. Remember, Mike's coming up for a re-election, and we'd really like to know what his responses are. I'm Rosina. I write you emails with concerns of your voting behavior regarding Trump and his actions. You support him, especially confirming the cabinet. Your responses are riddled with misinformation and lies. I fact check you, and then I send the responses back. And I get crickets. If I am fact checking them because they are wrong in your response, I send them back to you, and I get crickets, I get kind of bummed. And this is not about partisan, this is about issues, because we're about to lose our democracy.
My question is fiscal. With $450 million FEMA dollars being reallocated to open Alligator Alcatraz and $600 million taxpayer FEMA dollars being used to now open more concentration camps and ICE burning through $8.4 million a day to illegally detain people, how much does it cost for fascism? How much do the taxpayers have to pay for a fascist country?
That was in Nebraska tonight at a town hall held by Republican Congressman Mike Flood, him hearing from his constituents tonight. We have total clarity now on what Trump's intentions are for the country. But I mean it when I say we. The country gets it and is more against it than they've ever been. And opposing this administration and what Trump is trying to do is turning out to be the story of the century.
Moments ago, Attorney General Pam Bondi directed federal prosecutors to launch a grand jury investigation into the origins of the Russia probe. Specifically, the investigation will look into criminal referrals from Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, who made unsubstantiated allegations that President Obama and his aides in the intelligence community began the Russia probe to ruin Trump's chances of becoming president. Now, folks, there is no evidence that ever happened. Zippo, nada, none. In fact, the idea that the Obama administration conspired against Trump was contradicted by a Senate Intelligence Committee review overseen by none other than Marco Rubio, who was the committee chairman at the time. Joining us now, Brendan Ballou, a former federal prosecutor with the Justice Department's National Security Division, and our friend Angelo Corazon, the president and CEO of Media Matters for America.
So, Brendan, how many times during your time at DOJ were you asked to secure a grand jury investigation and indictment where it was not clear who was being charged, what the charges were, or the timeline you were operating on?
0 times. So this announcement, as you said nothing about who's being investigated, what they're being investigated for, what the charging instrument would be, what the charges would be. The thing, though, that surprised me the most, or that was most interesting to me about what wasn't announced, was who was actually going to do the investigation. They just said that it was going to be an attorney in the Department of Justice.
An unnamed federal prosecutor.
Exactly, which suggests to me that they have not yet found a credible U.S. attorney to take this on.
Why do you say that?
Well, one thing that I always say when I come on here is that the Department of Justice depends entirely on its credibility. There are some hack U.S. attorneys that have gotten nominated and confirmed, unfortunately, that would be more than happy to take on an investigation like this. But if you actually want to secure an indictment in front of a grand jury, 18 or more citizens, you need somebody that actually is going to be credible in front of them. And that they didn't announce this suggests that they haven't found that person yet.
Auditions are ongoing.
I just think this is crazy because it's just a distraction. It is a huge distraction, and it just goes to show that they're spiraling. But this is the Russia probe is another conspiracy theory that Obama and all of these folks within the Obama administration trumped up these charges and these claims against Donald Trump because they didn't want him to win, and that they were that they wiretapped his phone right during these are all conspiracy theories.
Wasn't there evidence that the Russians did try to meddle in our election?
Yes, but it's another conspiracy theory, and I think because Donald Trump is saying, I don't know. You tell me if the radio people have picked this one up, but he's seen what the Epstein, controversy around that conspiracy theory has done to him. It has not helped him. His wobbliness, because it's like, well, why don't you want to distance yourself from all the pedophilia, is not giving us more answers. It's providing more questions. On this, maybe his administration feels like, well, the people are with me on the Russia probe. I'm on the up and up on that conspiracy theory. So let me just mix that thing up on the table, and perhaps that'll distract people to look over here and not over at this thing.
Yeah, it's the safest possible thing that he could tap into as it relates to these conspiracies and these narratives. And it's also one of the promises that they've been making. And when I heard this, I thought all the way back to November of 2017, because I remember a Rush Limbaugh segment where he basically laid out a story that sounded exactly like what was reported today, a fantasy, a fiction, in which the Trump's Department of Justice literally just has a non-named U.S. attorney launch an investigation to get James Clapper and John Brennan for Russiagate. I mean, it's literally, they plucked this from a Rush Limbaugh segment. And it wasn't just then, and this gets to your point about it being safe. But that one, he was such a potent storyteller that those things have legs. And when he sort of laid that architecture out back then, and obviously it existed around it, but he told it in such a concise way. If you then pull the thread, from that time period on, just a couple years, maybe year and a half or so, 18 months, Fox News did 2,000 segments alone on that very topic, a notion of this investigation being launched by the Department of Justice that would then expose and prosecute these people. So to your point about it being safe, it is the safest possible play. And the two other corollaries to it are, one, this is part of his campaign promise. He launched in Waco, promising to be revenge. This was one of the revenge items, that he would go after these individuals and prosecute them. And the other is that, I'm so happy you started with the frame, that it's about his base. Yeah. Because it's not about the rest of MAGA media or Trump-aligned media. They don't care. See, they have not been percolating and swimming in this Russiagate stuff for the past 8 years. Trump's base has the part.
I'm sorry, what are we then defining as his base here?
I would say it's the people who were listening to talk radio 8 years ago and had cable that have now finally got Roku but don't know that it's Roku and still think that they are flipping the channels on a cable box and are now, for the first time ever, maybe listening to YouTube or watching YouTube because Tucker Carlson is no longer on Fox, right? That's his base. His base is the talk radio listener or the Fox News viewer, and the people around it, the ones that have been percolating in QAnon and this. It's not the Joe Rogan audiences or the Theo Von audiences or the broadcasts. They were in it for the conspiracies against the abstract deep state, but they never cared about Russiagate. In fact, they love Obama. So this doesn't actually do anything for them. And I think that's the last thing I'll say, is that it's a little landmine there, because it's going to make some of those people really mad. They love Obama. They're going to think, what is this guy doing? I don't know anything about Russiagate. This feels like a distraction to stop us talking about your pedophilia defense.
Well, I want to stick with that for a little bit, because you do open up a little bit of the other side of this in terms of how this is being fed by the administration in the first instance to that base. It's not, and this, we sort of touched on this last week, that you got to be careful about who the players are here. The Joe Rogan types, the folks who are the influencers, the ones who are kind of playing in this space at that level, are not the base. They're not the rank and file moms and dads out there who put the MAGA hat on. In fact, the people burning MAGA hats probably, that's a whole nother conversation. But it does beg the question of what does this grand jury process do that either legitimizes or delegitimizes the story?
The thing is, I was thinking, you're talking about all these conspiracy theories. It seems like the worst thing that could happen here is actually that they bring an indictment that gets to a verdict. If you're basing a case entirely on conspiracy theories and then you bring it to the public, eventually that's going to have to get judged by a judge and by a jury.
Joining us now, NBC Shaquille Brewster in Chicago. NBC Sahil Kapoor is on Capitol Hill. Former Republican Congressman of Florida, Carlos Curbelo, is an MSNBC political analyst. And Basil Smikle, former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party and MSNBC political analyst, joins me here in studio. So, Shaq, wow, another showdown in Texas. It's escalating as we get closer to Governor Abbott's 4 p.m. Eastern deadline. So tell us what's happening. Both sides digging in.
That's exactly right. Both sides are completely digging in. You have Governor Abbott, the governor of Texas, saying that these Democrats are running away from their responsibilities, saying that they must show up by that 3 p.m. Central Time deadline or risk removal from the state House of Representatives there. And you have Democrats, I just looked at my inbox, and they're making clear, the Texas House Democrats are making clear they're not responding or returning to the state of Texas today, or at least any time soon, with a schedule of events. We know later this evening they'll have an event in Chicago area. We know they're appearing at a summit in Boston for state legislatures. And just this morning, you saw a press conference where they joined the governor of New York and used some colorful language in pushing back on Governor Abbott. I want you to listen to the words of one Texas lawmaker.
There is no felony in the Texas Penal Code for what he says. So respectfully, he's making up some okay? He's trying to get sound bites, and he has no legal mechanism. And if he did, subpoenas from Texas don't work in New York, so he gonna come get us how? Subpoenas in Texas don't work in Chicago. He's gonna come get us how? So let me be clear. He's putting up smoke and mirrors.
That doesn't sound like a lawmaker who's planning to return home anytime soon, Chris. And, when you listen to some of the rhetoric here, they're making clear that they're also centering President Donald Trump in this. They're saying that this is a fight to protect democracy. They say that if Texas goes through and is able to get these new maps, to pass these new maps, that can mean Republican control of the House of Representatives, continued Republican control come the midterms. They believe that this is a fight for democracy, and they're asking people from all across the country to help them in this fight.
All right, so Basil, former Attorney General Eric Holder told MSNBC that people all across the U.S. should be concerned about what's happening in Texas. Take a listen.
The stakes are enormous. They're trying to do in Texas is to try to manipulate the results of the 2026 election. People should understand that this is not simply a Texas matter. This is a national matter. Donald Trump is telling Texas Republicans to gerrymander even more than they already have to try to find 5 additional seats in an attempt to have a 2026 election that doesn't go against him.
So, Basil, what are the stakes for the rest of the country if this does, and it could, set off a national fight, state by state, tit for tat?
Absolutely right. First of all, I thank you and your writers for using the term left the state, where some outlets have said that these lawmakers have fled the state. This wasn't something done out of fear. This is a sign of strength that Democrats in Texas have shown Democrats across the country in terms of being able to push back on on something that Eric Holder had been campaigning against, right? This really hyper-partisan use of redistricting, particularly in the middle of the census here. So the fact that Eric Holder, has gone back and said, you know what, things that I might have advocated for before, no longer apply. I mean, that is a really significant telling. Now, someone used the term political apartheid, and that's exactly what this is, because it's not just about the congressional districts. Remember, you can also change state and local legislative districts. So what they're intending to do is not just increase the number of Republicans, but to isolate not just Democrats, but in particular people of color and poor people in their state. That can happen anywhere else in the country. So it is good that Democrats have decided to make this move. And I would want, as we've already seen, more and more Democratic governors coming together to say, to show a united front against this.
So, Congressman, as Governor Abbott threatens Texas Democrats with fines, arrests, felonies, potentially even their seats, how serious do you think the risk is that they're taking? We should know, because it was well delivered, let's say. Representative Jones, they're going to come get us how? I can't even come close to delivering it the way she did. What do you say, Congressman?
Look, Chris, obviously there's a risk. Obviously there's a risk that some voters don't like the fact that these legislators are leaving their state. But I think most people will perceive that they are doing what they can, that they are playing the cards that they've been dealt. Obviously, this is the only way that they can try to slow down this process. Who knows if they can even stop it. But I also think there's a risk on the part of Republicans being too aggressive and being too heavy-handed. If we just look back at the last 20 years, neither party has been able to maintain a trifecta, meaning control of the White House, the House, and the Senate after those first 2 years. Why? Because the perception that parties, when they have full control of the government, are too aggressive, are too heavy-handed in pushing their policies and in trying to remain in power, that tends to produce a backlash. So while this might help Republicans in Texas, it may hurt them in other swing districts throughout the country.
Sahil, what are you hearing from congressional Democrats?
Well, there's certainly been a lot of anger, Chris. There's also a determination by Democrats to retaliate. They see this mid-decade move in Texas as an escalation of partisan warfare over redistricting, because this time it isn't being driven by a court decision or by some external event. This is simply being pushed by President Trump and Governor Abbott, clearly as a way to expand Republican power and knock out House Democrats who won in existing districts. And now Democrats are insisting they need to fight fire with fire in blue states, and they say they won't unilaterally disarm if Republicans are going all in here. Take a listen to what House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said this morning.
We're only 3 seats short from taking back the House. That is a historically close number. That is what has House Republicans and Donald Trump scared to death of what is going to happen in the midterm election. That's why we're seeing this extraordinary action in Texas. But you also are going to see an extraordinary response from Democrats coast to coast throughout the country and at all points in between.
Now, this is a real vibe shift in the party from the days when Democrats were led by good government activists in their base, tried to ban partisan gerrymandering as recently as 3 years ago when they had the trifecta here in Washington. There's also frustration now, given that some blue states like California and New York have enacted limits on partisan redistricting, including in some places independent commissions, which Democrats in those states are now looking to get around, either by finding loopholes, by changing state laws. Other blue states like Illinois, of course, have already drawn favorable maps for Democrats. This new effort, however, is being led by California Governor Gavin Newsom, who a few days ago tweeted a very hypothetical House map in his state where all 52 seats are blue. And in this case, they could knock out 9 House Republicans. That gives you a sense of the emerging mentality among Democrats. So bottom line, it's unclear what Democrats can do in time for the 2026 midterms. But sooner or later, it looks like they will retaliate if Texas Republicans go forward with this. Chris?
I've been covering redistricting for a long time. I remember the times when there were all these maps in rooms and people were like looking at charts. And now you just plug it all into a computer, right? And then suddenly you have a Gavin Newsom map that shows everything is blue. But look, Democrats have had a problem. There was a poll by AP. 35% of Democrats have negative attributes that they attribute to their party, using words like weak and ineffective. Is this the kind of thing that can help them turn it around?
I absolutely think it can. And just those scenes of Governor Pritzker and Governor Hochul meeting with Democrats from Texas shows that unity. attorneys general, Democratic attorneys general have band together to fight Donald Trump. Why can't Democratic governors? They're doing it. I think seeing more of that really does help. I would also add the Supreme Court is about to take on a case that may gut the rest of the Voting Rights Act. So there's a lot at stake here. And I would say, you know, for a number of years, Democrats were governed by when they go low, we go high. That worked potentially for a short period of time, but we're not in that space right now. You know, I grew up, if a bully's coming after you, punch that bully in the nose. That's how you get their attention. And that's what Democrats need to do right now.
So, Congressman, New York Governor Kathy Hochul giving a little note to the control room that I'm going to come to this a little early, but it seems to fit in here. She made a threat of her own if Texas goes ahead and does what they said they're going to do. Let me play for you what Kathy Hochul said.
Republicans are willing to rewrite these rules to give themselves an advantage, then they're leaving us no choice. We must do the same. There's a phrase, you have to fight fire with fire. That is a true statement of how we're feeling right now. I'm exploring with our leaders every option to redraw our state congressional lines as soon as possible.
So here's my question for you. You've been around for a little while, Congressman. I mean, is this a question of redistricting, or for the average voter, you know, who, if you walk down the street and said, how often do congressional districts get redistricted, and based on what? You're not going to get, you know, every 10 years based on the census. That's just not where we are, except, of course, for viewers of MSNBC. So how's the average voter, you think, going to look at this? And is it clear whether one side or the other will get the advantage?
Chris, at the end of the day, I think the average voter is going to just trust government and our institutions even less. I think if you talk to the average American, they want our politicians to work together. They want them to figure things out. They want them to work collaboratively as much as possible. And this is going to result in the complete opposite. The last thing this country needs, having served in Congress, I can tell you the last thing this country needs is more partisan congressional districts, because it is going to lead to more gridlock. It is going to lead to an even nastier tone in our politics. So at the end of the day here, everyone loses. And it's why this action is so dangerous, because it triggers a race to the bottom. You're going to see the blue states do the same thing. And at the end of the day, we're going to have a Congress where no one is even willing to meet or talk to one another. At that point, we are in a very, very serious crisis.
But first, let's go to the numbers, Mika, or the numbers that weren't.
Yes, the numbers that weren't, I guess. White House economic advisors now are defending President Trump's firing of the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Trump's move came on Friday, hours after a stunning government report showed hiring had slowed down significantly over the past 3 months, with the U.S. adding just 73,000 new jobs in July. Deep revisions to the previous 2 months now indicate that the job market is considerably worse than previously thought, with the U.S. only adding 19,000 jobs in May, compared to an initial report of 144,000 and only 14,000 in June, after an initial report of 147,000. Trump attacked Erica McIntyre on social media following the report, claiming the numbers are being produced by a Biden administration appointee, and ordered his administration to fire her. A career civil servant, McIntyre was confirmed on a bipartisan basis in 2024 and had been widely respected across party lines for her nonpartisan approach. She responded to her abrupt dismissal on social media, saying it was the honor of her life to serve as BLS commissioner. Speaking to reporters yesterday, Trump continued to air his grievances and said he would announce a new statistician soon.
We'll be announcing a new statistician sometime over the next 3 or 4 days. We had no confidence. I mean, the numbers were ridiculous, what she announced, but that was just one negative number. All of the numbers seem to be great. And so we'll see how that comes out. And if you remember, just before the election, this woman came out with these phenomenal numbers on Biden's economy. Phenomenal numbers. And then right after the election, they announced that those numbers were wrong. And that's what they did the other day. So it's a scam, in my opinion.
You know, actually, Mika, less is more on this issue, because the more he talks about it, the more he just proves how wrong it was to fire this woman. First of all, he just said all the numbers leading up to this report were positive. He always praised her numbers. If he's going to blame this on her instead of actually data, it wasn't her. But so, you know, the Wall Street Journal got quotes of all the positive things he had said about the job numbers reports from her before. And also he keeps going back to this line about, oh, they put out a blockbuster report right before the election. No, they didn't. That's just not true. I mean, from the reports I saw, it was actually tepid and weak right before the election. So, again, I know facts don't matter in this case, but again, it seems as far as fluctuations go in jobs, that always happens. That has always happened. It always will happen. As far as the numbers being revised the next month or two. And as the Wall Street Journal wrote last night, the numbers are revised not because of any political bias, and not because of any political bias over the past 2 decades, but because of employers not participating as much, and it taking another month to get more details and pulling it out of the employers, and then they revise it a month later. So again, on all of these points, they just don't hold any water, and we're going to get to why this is so concerning for Americans and their economy in the long run.
So, Director of the National Economic Council and top Trump economic advisor Kevin Hassett defended the president's decision yesterday on Meet the Press, as well as his claim the jobs reports were rigged, but failed to produce any evidence to support that claim.
But just to be very clear, I mean, there are 40 people put these numbers together. Is the president planning to fire all 40 people involved in putting these numbers together?
We're going to try to get the numbers so that they're transparent and reliable.
President Trump himself was happy to accept the jobs numbers issued under McIntyre's leadership when the numbers were good. Take a listen to what he said in the past.
The numbers were much better, as you know, than projected by the media.
In 3 months, we have created 350,000 jobs. Think of that.
A lot of jobs are being created. That's what happened this morning. We saw the jobs.
So is the president prepared to fire anyone who reports data that he disagrees with?
No, absolutely not. The president wants his own people there so that when we see the numbers, they're more transparent and more reliable. And if there are big changes and big revisions, we expect more big revisions for the jobs data in September, for example, then we want to know why. We want people to explain it to us.
Were the numbers wrong? Do you have any hard evidence that you can present to the American public that these numbers, these revisions that were reported, and there were plenty of revisions under former President Biden, including right before the election, do you have any hard evidence that these numbers were wrong?
Yeah, there is very hard evidence that we're looking at the biggest revision since 1968.
Are you going to present that evidence?
If you look at the number itself, it is the evidence.
But just saying it's an outlier is not evidence, Mr. Hassett.
It's a historically important outlier. It's something that's unprecedented.
Still
so unprecedented
it's still
that
not
I've been looking at
evidence,
it
though.
for 40 years, and I'm like, it must be a typo.
So, as Joe mentioned, the Wall Street Journal editorial board has a new piece out entitled The Bureau of Labor Denial. And it describes the burden of Trump's advisors who have had to support the president's claim the numbers were rigged. And it reads in part, quote, start with the labor secretary who told Bloomberg TV early on Friday, that even though the jobs data was revised downward for May and June, we've seen positive job growth. Okay, sometimes in politics you have to look at a rotten apple and call it merely overripe. But then Mr. Trump fired the BLS director, who reports to the labor secretary. She snapped to attention, I agree wholeheartedly with @POTUS that our jobs numbers must be fair, accurate, and never manipulated for political purposes, she tweeted. So were the jobs data that were positive in the morning rigged by the afternoon? As Wall Street Journal editorial board member Alyssa Finley writes nearby, the BLS job revisions are best explained by a decline in business response rates, not political bias. The reality of slowing job growth is clear to anyone paying attention, no matter the official statistics. Mr. Trump's data denial is one more reason fewer Americans will trust the government. So, Joe, it doesn't seem like the Wall Street Journal is falling for this, if it is so much as the president has fired this person in retribution.
Seriously, anybody that's followed the news or followed economics for more than 15 minutes isn't buying any of this. By the way, I'm sorry for talking. I thought my mic was cut. I was talking to Alex about where we're going to move the questions next. That's the bad news. The good news is, obviously, since you heard me, TJ's back. TJ, it's great to have you back in the director's
sure
chair
is.
again.
Thank you.
The man who,
good old TJ. Blame him.
No, that was my fault. That was all my fault. I apologize. So, Jonathan Lemire, this is one of these moments. I will say the second term. People ask, what's the difference between the second term and the first term inside the White House? Second term, as you know, and other people that work day in and day out with people that are working in the Trump White House this time, you can get off the record, you can sit, you can talk to them, you can talk, well, this doesn't make sense. He's stretching this here. Should the DOD Secretary, Secretary of Defense really does? And you can, you get straight answers often back and forth and have a really good, meaningful discussion and trying to figure out, what in the world's going on. For me, and I'm curious about you, this was an exception to that rule. Everybody put on their Baghdad Bob hat this weekend because there just was no justification for it. I was surprised that I didn't even get the sort of quiet eye rolling from inside the White House. They all, I guess they understood. We're going to follow the Baghdad Bob line, and they all did it this weekend. What did your reporting find?
Yeah, similar experiences here. Those in the White House, those close to the president, in lockstep, asserting without evidence that there was bias in these job numbers and that President Trump simply was justified in doing what he did. None of that is true. This is a bad one. This is a bad one. And this is a bad one. Governments and economies and businesses can only make decisions based on hard data, on statistics. This calls into question so much of what Washington produces now. If you're a career bureaucrat, if you're a government official, how can you now go about doing your job in an honest way without fear of being fired? Do you now comport yourself in a way to curry favor with the president by giving numbers that he wants? There are a lot of historical parallels, and we'll get to them this morning here. This is echoes of Soviet Union. This is echoes of Argentina, before economies collapsed. You're not, as our friend Peter Baker, who we'll talk to later in the show, wrote in a really good piece this weekend, in Washington, you're entitled to your own opinions. You're not entitled to your own facts. And right now, President Trump is insisting he's entitled to his own facts. And this is one that I think we're going to have a hard-pressed to have anyone mount a credible defense for what was a very dangerous move. It also sets up worrisome precedents.